Welcome back to the podcast. I'm your host, Rabbi Daniel Levine. Today we have an incredible conversation with two fascinating and powerful women. We have Soraya M. Deen, who is a Muslim feminist lawyer and activist, and has done a lot to champion fighting anti-Semitism within the Islamic community. And we also have a returning guest, Julie Marzouk, who is a longtime immigration rights lawyer and college professor. In this conversation, we spoke about Zionism, anti-Semitism within the Islamic community and how to fight it, the strained interfaith relations between the Jewish and Muslim community, especially after October 7th. We had a bit of a back and forth / debate about immigration and all of the policies surrounding that. And we talked about reform within the Islamic world and much, much more. Before getting into the episode today, I just want to highlight the importance of subscribing to this podcast. Your subscription allows me to get great guests for the future. We have a couple of members of Congress that have agreed to be on the podcast in the future, and your support in both liking, subscribing, commenting, and sharing this with your friends makes that all possible. And now I bring you Soraya and Julie. So you're obviously a Muslim woman. You're dressed like a Islamic woman. In your bio, you said you're a Muslim feminist, and I see you walked in with the Bring Them Home hostage necklace. Can you just talk a little bit about how these identities, as obviously somebody who cares about the Israeli hostages in Gaza, and your identity as a Muslim woman, how are they coming into contact with each other?
Thank you for having me, Daniel. I believe Zionism is a fulfillment of a Quranic prophecy, a Quranic need, because the Quran talks extensively about Israel being a state for the Israelites. So I have a different take about it. So I feel when somebody who is Jewish is hurt, and Hamas particularly taking the hostages was anything but Islamic. And therefore I stand up for the hostages.
There's a guy that I've been seeing on YouTube. He's been popping up on my algorithm, and he goes on these, random chat roulette type sites. And he's, a proud Zionist. I think he even has a shirt that says proud Zionist. And he's obviously very familiar with, he speaks fluent Arabic, he's very familiar with the Quran, and he constantly is quoting one of these verses in the Quran that talks about how, the people of Israel will inherit the land of Israel. If it's that straightforward, why is your view a very minority view in the Muslim world? In other words, why, if I would imagine, and please push back if you think I'm incorrect, if we brought in 100 Muslims from a variety of Islamic countries and they were all sitting here and just heard you said that, probably 95 to 99 of them would just be like, we have no idea what you're talking about. You are wrong. Where is that view coming from?
I'm not surprised, because most of us are very illiterate about our faiths. Nobody really studies it as a way to live a life. We go to the mosques, we believe in what is taught to us. Yeah, you're right. So not many Muslims know this. So one of my tasks is also to educate the Muslims, to get to the basics. It's a time where we have to go rock bottom and then come back alive.
There's a lot of, there's sort of a meta debate when it comes to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and maybe this is a good place to, start a bigger conversation. Whether or not is this a nationalistic / political conflict, or is this a religious conflict? The obvious answer is it has elements of both, but recently, in the last couple of years, I have been very partial to the argument that this is mostly a religious conflict that's happening between the Islamic world and not even necessarily the Jewish world, but say the Western world of liberalism. This is a conflict between fundamentalism and liberalism. The fact that Israel is a state of Jews, I think that does matter, but I think the, key factor there is that there are elements in the Islamic world that have clearly moved away from wanting anything that looks like the West, and liberalism and freedom of speech and freedom of, sexuality and gender orientation and anything there. Talk to us a little bit about that. I'm curious, do you agree with that diagnosis that this is mostly religious? And if so, what's causing this? In other words, why, because oftentimes, I'll speak firsthand, from an American Jewish community perspective, for my entire life, and I think this has changed after October 7th, but my entire life, the dominant ethos in the American Jewish community is, we just want a two-state solution, and, okay, this isn't great for anybody, but at the end of the day, everyone will get to live in peace. I think October 7th has shaken a lot of people's faith, including my own, in the two-state solution, because all of a sudden it doesn't really seem like this is about politics and access to some sort of geography and freedom of movement for Palestinians. It seems like this is much more, no, we are in sort of a clash of civilizations with fundamentalism and liberalism. I'm curious, do you agree with that diagnosis? And I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
You know, in the Muslim world, we are fighting a new theology called Palestinianism. Our allegiance to Palestinianism as strong as our allegiance to Islam. Because of the stand that I took, it was a humanistic stand, because I always keep thinking, what if after October 7th, the Arab world said Hamas did something wrong? Hamas should not have kidnapped. Hamas should not have attacked. Nobody did that. And today, case in point is just 2 days ago or last week, there was a Palestinian journalist who was killed. He had this press vest on, but there's ample evidence coming out that he was a Hamas operative and he was a terrorist. And today you see the same conversations we are having. Nobody's calling out Al Jazeera for employing a terrorist. Rather, we are focusing on, oh, why did Israel kill this man? So this conversation is so deep. And to me, it is very personal, because if our final goal is to destroy somebody, we can stay on this lane. You know, if we are going to resuscitate ourselves and look for powerful solutions that work, we have to break that barrier. So you asked many questions. So this is the overall theme of and the conversation and the pulse of what is happening. And I look at this whole conflict as something that is deeply rooted in theology, because I work in that area. I go to mosques just to hear what is being told. And I remember after October 7th, I went to a local mosque in my area with my rabbi friend, and we were seated there waiting for the sermon to begin. And all of a sudden I could hear, I was so embarrassed seated there, so sad, so broken, that in Los Angeles there was a sermon that was taking place where Jews were we were taught that Jews cannot be trusted, and this is what happened then. So I focus on the theological impact that has fueled anti-Semitism, and I think it is theology-based.
So I teach Jewish history at UC Irvine. I actually just recorded an episode of the history of Jews under Islamic rule, just to give the brief 30-second summary just for people listening that might not have heard that episode. Jews since the 9th century have been treated under what was called the Pact of Umar. They were treated as dhimmi status, which on the one hand was a lot better than living under Christendom. So I always joke in my class, if you're going to be resuscitated in a time machine in the 10th or 11th century, and somebody's asking, do you go to a Christian-controlled area or Islamic-controlled area? You pick Islamic-controlled area 9 times out of 10. That said, dhimmi status was very much, secondary. There was a specific tax. There were all sorts of specific laws. But I don't think the vast majority of the Islamic world, there were exceptions, would not have had this theologic view towards Jews if we roll back the clock to the 10th and 11th century. Obviously, the Islamic world is very vast, but if you pop into one of these areas, there wasn't really this, animosity and Jews can't be trusted and they're trying to control the world. And, a lot of these anti-Semitic tropes are borrowed from one of 3 places. They're borrowed from the Christian world, right? This idea that Jews can't be trusted and all of that. They're borrowed from Eastern Europe, so both, protocols of elders of Zion and then subsequent Soviet anti-Semitism. And some of the more nefarious kinds are borrowed from Nazi-like anti-Semitism. I mean, how did that happen in the Islamic world? And I don't think this has to do just with Jews. I think there is sort of a wider story here. I mean, I've read a lot of Bernard Lewis's books, and he talks about this. He wrote a book called The Crisis of Islam, where he sort of documents this, not in terms of the Jewish angle, but in terms of just general Islamic being anti-anything that sort of the Western world is coming up with. But, I mean, how did we get to this point, where a mosque in Los Angeles is talking like this right after October 7th?
I would think many reasons. One is we don't know the Jews. We don't know what happened with them. We don't know the programs. We don't know their journey. We don't know the persecution. We don't know enough about the Holocaust. So when Arab nationalists have hijacked the conversation about who the Jews are, and it is really streamlined to us who are people who are in South Asian Muslims. I'm a South Asian Muslim. So I think it is repeated rhetoric that has won today. And that's very important for the Muslim world and for the world at large to acknowledge that 680 million Muslims live in South Asia. And we have followed what was taught to us about what Islam was, who the Jew was, from the Arab perspective. We never explored the truth, we never examined it as we should have. So now I believe, I'm a firm believer who says every setback is a setup for a comeback. So today we are reviving ourselves to really go deeper and to understand where is this anti-Semitism coming. There was a time, you're right, that there was a lot of collaboration and solidarity between the Jews and the Muslims. I think it was during the time of Maimonides. There was a lot of intellectual exploration. But somehow that we got lost. It didn't continue.
I talked to a Egyptian Muslim woman, Dalia Ziada, a couple of months ago, and I asked her this question. I'm excited to ask you this as well. You grew up in Sri Lanka, so probably you weren't talking about Israel and Jews as much as somebody growing up in Egypt. I'm gonna guess that's true. But in your education system, what were the ideas that were said about either Israel, Zionism, Jews? Was this a topic that you spoke about? Was it just sort of this far off topic that you never discussed? And how did you end up getting to the point where you are now? I'm going to guess, the ideas that you're sharing with us now were not something you were taught when you were 12 growing up in Sri Lanka.
Well, growing up in Sri Lanka, we were not taught about the Jews. But in Muslim circles, if ever something went wrong, I've heard elders say, Yahudi, Yahudi. So there was this, this reference, no matter what, that's everything that goes wrong because of the Jew. So I recall when I was growing up, but we didn't have textbooks like we have in America today, where it was a subject. We were not taught. We went to the mosques largely, and women didn't go as much. It was not taught to us that we needed to hate the Jews. But it's different now. Even as I speak with you, in Sri Lanka today, there is a huge rally happening for Free Palestine tomorrow. And I'm told that people from Maldives, Pakistan, from Bangladesh are all coming to Sri Lanka. And this is deeply concerning, because right now what is happening is we are creating epicenters for Jew hatred in South Asia. And I am told, Bernard Lewis said, somebody had told him, an Indonesian scholar, when anti-Semitism breaks out in South Asia, it will be worse than in the Arab world, because we have numbers. Mm-hmm. Yes, and when Bernard Lewis visited one of the colleges in Indonesia, the largest Muslim population is in Indonesia. There were posters of Khomeini in those dorms. So something is brewing. So we have to be very, very vigilant.
So what was your story? I mean, I know you're sitting here with Julie. We'll get you in a second, and you guys are going around, as partners. Clearly, Julie is proud Jew and Zionist, and all of the things. What was your journey to now being sitting here wearing the hostage sticker? Talking with two very proud Jewish Zionists. How did you end up getting to this place?
Okay, so September 11th, 2007, I had just picked my 7-year-old son from school. And that day, he came to me crying and he asked me, Mommy, are we terrorists? So this was a consequence of what happened September 11. And it was the most defining moment in my life, because I was a practicing lawyer, and when I had my son, I stayed home to raise him, and this was asked from me. And then I realized at that time that home for us now is the United States. It's not like many people here who think they have a leg in that country where they come from, and they don't do the best for the country they live in. That's another story about my dad, who had a profound influence in my life. He emphasized civic responsibility and loyalty to the country. So when my son was bullied, of course I felt helpless, I felt hopeless. and I knew I had to do something. So I went home and I Googled interfaith organizations in Los Angeles, and I stumbled upon the Valley Interfaith Council. That's the largest interfaith network in San Fernando Valley at that time. This is years ago. And there I started attending their meetings. And then I met Marsha Novak, who is a Jewish woman. We became very close friends, like Julie and I today. We just had the pulse for the work, we understood the call of the times. And Marsha was so instrumental in my journey. She helped me to navigate that particular crisis of showing up. That was a powerful lesson that I learned. If you are being pushed around, if you are being not spoken of correctly, show up and tell your story. So Marsha and I worked together a lot. We organized interfaith marches, and later she and I together founded the Interfaith Solidarity Network. It's still one of the largest interfaith organizations in the San Fernando Valley. And there began my journey to getting to know the Jews. And I built strong friendships with a lot in the Jewish community. So when, I began addressing anti-Semitism way before October 7th, because the mosques here in the United States were a grave danger than where I come from. There was open anti-Semitism, and we have to understand that in the Muslim world, no one is afraid, no one is incapable of being an anti-Semite. It was scary. It was scary. It didn't sit well with me. How can we go to a place of worship and talk bad about, talk hateful things? So I got to know many Jewish people, and then when Paul Kessler was murdered about half an hour from where I live in Thousand Oaks.
And just for listeners' background, he was, waving an Israeli flag on the side of the road, and during a rally, and he was pushed to the ground, hit his head, and died.
Yes, and I had told the Muslim leadership in Los Angeles, because we were active in interfaith work, having dialogue with the Jews and the Christians and the Hindus and the Zoroastrians. I said, it's time we have to condemn this, and nobody responded. And that's when my friend Anila Ali, she said, Soraya, why don't we work together? Let's form a coalition. So today we are a coalition of Muslim women. I run the Muslim Women Speakers Bureau because I believe in public narrative, telling our stories. So then we realized that we are the leaders we've been waiting for, and the hate towards the Jews can never end with the Jews, as we all know, And I'm really concerned about the position of the American Muslim today, because we are very vulnerable also.
Are you afraid, or have you been afraid for your physical safety at all? Meaning, I'm imagining you're not loved in WhatsApp groups, but okay, fine. People can say whatever they want on the internet. But has it ever come to the place where you in America are afraid that something might happen to you? Have you changed up what you do in your daily life because of security? I mean, talk about that angle, because I guess I'll take a step back, and maybe I'm a little bit giving you my inner turmoil here, so you can maybe diagnose me here. There's often two sides of me. One is the American liberal universalist side, that anytime somebody makes a statement, or I find myself making statements like, I'm very worried about the Islamic world becoming more radical, there's something that tells me, that's sort of a generalization, and you don't want to say that because that seems stereotype. And then there's the other side of me that, mostly agrees with everything you said. And it's like, holy crap, what is happening right now? Why is the Islamic world seemingly not condemning, obvious acts of anti-Semitism? And those two sides are debating in me. And so I'm just thinking, I don't know much about the American Muslim community. I think I've sadly learned more in the last 2 years than before. I was also very active in interfaith groups, both when I was in undergrad at UCLA and also just working on campus, but the interfaith interactions were very surface level. It was, here's some holidays, and here's halal food, and here's kosher food, and it's like, okay, great.
And you gefilte fish.
Yeah, well, maybe that maybe that explains anti-Semitism if we gave them gefilte fish, but talk to me about that in terms of your interaction in the American Muslim community. Is this something where you're showing up to the mosque and you're just having a civil dialogue, because there are Jews in the Jewish community, both to the left of me and to the right of me, that I'm friends with. I engage with them. I disagree with their ideas. If they voted for Bernie, I disagree with them. If they voted for Trump, I disagree with them. But I'm more than happy to, have an open and honest conversation. And there is no fear that at the end of the day of having a political or religious disagreement, anything, we want ill will towards each other. I'm guessing that's not true in the Islamic community. So push back if you think that, no, that is true. And talk to me a little bit about your own personal interaction.
True. Our friendship circles have so narrowed. I can count the number of Muslims we can honestly talk about this with. So in fact, I say, the Muslims are not listening to us, let's talk to the Jews, They listen to us. It's really bad. I'm glad that you asked. I was invited to a conference in Sri Lanka, back where I was born, last year in December, and the Muslims who were to attend the conference boycotted the conference. They say we cannot support her position on Israel. That's no connection. I was talking about gender and religion, how at the intersection of religion and gender, there's discrimination of women. So when I showed up to that conference, I had shared it with my friends here and colleagues here. They said, Soraya, don't even go for the conference. I said, no, I have to go for the conference. This is an opportunity for me to speak. I had to really hire bodyguards. I had to pay for bodyguards. So it's really bad. Like even in LA, we feel very severely ostracized and marginalized. So there has been a lot of pushback for what we are standing up for. But we are strongly convinced we are standing up for that which is right. And something that is so powerful that has happened is that we have enlarged our base. We have several imams who are joining with us and talking about this, bringing out the Quran, explaining. Somehow, we, as I said in the beginning, Muslims have really given up the intellectual exploration of their faith. And I have to work doubly hard because my children are raised in this country. I don't want them to feel marginalized.
You said something that I've been thinking about constantly when we talked on the phone 3 weeks ago. I don't even know if you remember saying this, but I've been thinking about it constantly. I've actually talked to a bunch of friends about it because it was such a stunning thing where we were talking about doing this podcast and you said something like, I can't even understand why you would want to talk to somebody from the Muslim community after everything our community has done to you. And for whatever reason, I found that, funny and ironic for two reasons. One, the sort of, liberal individualist side of me, still does not like grouping people together. So when you're sitting here, it's not, oh, we have a representative of, Muslim. It's like, oh, a very interesting woman with clearly a story that people don't oftentimes get to hear about from a background and perspective we don't get to hear about. But the other was, of course I would love to. I mean, the Jewish community is sort of yearning to have these types of conversations, and not even these types, because I'm going to guess you're sympathetic to Israel and pro-Israel, even if you were anti-Israel and you were sitting here and willing to have a conversation and, just do the absolute minimum, in my opinion, which is, condemn Hamas. But even if you were sitting here and you said that Israel was terrible and Zionism was a huge mistake, I mean, I would cherish nothing more than the ability to have those conversations, because right now, there's no conversation happening at all. I mean, the only conversation that's happening right now is between Jews on the far left that have, really, in my opinion, given up on all sense of Jewish identity and have sort of joined the far left and the Islamic community in America and also in other places like Australia and Europe in terms of this, demonization of Israel. So that's stuck with me a lot. I want to almost flip the script a little bit. So you said you're starting to work with imams, and you said, you also came to these, newfound views through interfaith. What can the Jewish community do? I'm guessing most of the people who listen to this podcast are, not young Muslims who are coming back from mosque, but they're Jews who are listening to this, and they are, again, would want nothing more than to have, 10,000 of you in every single community across the U.S. and otherwheres. Are there any misconceptions? Is the Jewish community doing anything wrong? Is there, if they would just do this? And so give us constructive criticism in terms of, because the only thing in life that we can obviously change is ourselves and our community. So, if you had some message for the Jewish community, how can we better approach this?
We joke about this in our circles. come Friday, you can't talk to a Jew. They're observing Sabbaths. Saturday is taken and Sunday is not taken as much. That I'm just telling this in a lighter vein. So I think in the Jewish community, what we are seeing is that all hands are not on deck. We need all hands on deck. And we need for you also to uplift our voices. Because when you stand strongly with us, the world hears us, especially my community is going to hear us. So, in fact, I was at a meeting yesterday talking to a big Jewish organization, and the person who invited me to that meeting was a Jewish person. He said, "Can't you see what these women are trying to do? We should be running with them, like getting a ball and trying to score a point, cross the line, like in a rugby game."
Not only Jews, I mean, I love the rugby, and no American will have any idea what you're talking about. You've just lost now. I'm totally kidding. Not just Jews. I mean, the thing that people are going to be sick of me saying this, but any left-wing activist in the world should be trying to scoop you up and platforming you on every single news show in the world because, and I do want to eventually get to your feminist activism because I think that's also super interesting, but sorry to digress.
Yeah, so I feel there's a level of silence in not challenging the narrative. I was at a conference, semi-conference, a 4-hour conference, where there were like 60% were Jewish people, and they were bashing Israel and they were bashing being Jewish, and they didn't say anything. And I had to change my script because I didn't want to be ambushed either, So I find that a little challenging. Maybe I need to go to wider circles. I might not see it. Maybe my circle is so confined. I feel that the urgency of this is not really grasped in the Jewish community. They want to give, they don't understand the source of the hatred well. They feel, I feel that they feel, oh, this will go away, or not everybody is bad. So that the urgency is lost.
The problem is, and this is something that I have recently been trying very hard not to do, but it's still very hard, is that there is this sort of, especially in, American liberal or progressive culture, which most Jews live in, liberal cities, and most Jews attend college, which is quite liberal and progressive, that to an untrained ear and to somebody who is not steeped in this conversation, what we are talking right now sounds very Islamophobic. I don't think it is, but if we give this conversation to the average American 20-year-old, and let's say they didn't know your background and they just heard this conversation, oh, there's, radicalization in the Islamic world, and even in mosques in LA, they're talking about Jews this way. Not only would that not be seen as progressives by, oh my God, there's a problem, how can we ensure the Islamic community doesn't go down a path of radicalization? That is, oh my God, a bunch of Islamophobes were having a podcast, we should condemn them. And so this is the problem. One, it's people actually seeing the problem. And then once you see the problem, how do you have this conversation in a way that there's no, ethnic or religious hatred. We talked before about, medieval Islamic world, and it's clearly not ethnic because, there are Jews from Egypt, and my wife is from Iran, and Julie's from, dad is from Egypt. So it's clearly not an ethnic thing. But I think that's a little bit of the problem that many Jews have, is they just don't want to be called racist, Islamophobic, anything like that for having these conversations, so a lot of them default to having the conversation on the sort of terms of the Islamic community or the left, which is, yes, you're right, Israel's doing a lot of bad, maybe not, and then they can debate the increments of bad that Israel is, as opposed to taking a step back and being like, wait a minute, this entire thing is taking place under the premise of anti-Semitism and Zionism being this boogeyman for global Jews and all of that. So I think that's a little bit more the problem that the Jewish community is running into.
I think they have to rise above that. Don't be discouraged by names and tags. I myself am being called an Islamophobe, well, the facts are clear that something different has to be done. And a different understanding of the situation needs to be raised. Dr. King was very clear. He said, first thing you got to do is you look deep within and take an inventory of how you are showing up. How is that community showing up? If you would have spoken up and if that person didn't speak up, you have to call that out. You have to call that out. Because I know, with the few Jews that I know, I had such Jewish friends. And in fact, I learned those lessons, some of them from them too. So don't give a free pass to the Muslims. There was a little video I said, Jews have to hold Muslims accountable. If you had a Muslim friend, I don't know whether you did, I said, pick up the phone. Why didn't you call me after October 7th?
So I have/had, somewhere oscillating between have and had, and over the years, as well as students that I've taught that are obviously come from an Islamic background, at most it was reticence or silence. And the times that I have tried to push, it did not end with a, oh my God, you're right, self-reflective. It ended with sort of a doubling down. And I think that's also, personally, I guess I can tell you where I've landed, and then I would love to hear actually Julie's perspective. We can get you in here. Is I've given up on a lot of lofty universalist ideas after October 7th. I like to joke that I sort of went through my own Herzl political Zionism, and Herzl went from being a assimilationist, fully progressive socialist, thinking that Jews should just assimilate into Western Europe, all the way to we just need to worry about ourselves, and we need a strong state and a strong army. And, not that everything else isn't important, but, almost like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if I am suffocating, the first thing I need to do is breathe. I don't have to worry about really anything else. That's sort of how I've started seeing the Jewish community. So in my mind, I've given up, and, this is sort of sad to say, I've given up on a lot of the outreach to people outside the Jewish community. And my goal has become strengthening the Jewish community, whether in America or Israel and Zionism and all of that. It's not to say that I don't, love it when people outside the Jewish community are having these conversations and everything there. It just seems like in my efforts in the past, I've run trips to Israel, I guess, in the last 8 years. I've worked on campus. I've been the Hillel rabbi. For years, we were running trips to Israel where we took mostly non-Jewish students to Israel and also the West Bank. And we specifically, leaned into complexity, right? There is a type of taking people to Israel, which is just, full hasbara, which is, look, Israel's amazing. It's, the world leader in all of this. It invented the cherry tomato. This was very much not that trip. This was we are going to talk to everybody from a, West Bank PA representative who's essentially saying terrorism is a non-issue, all the way to a right-wing settler, all the way to a kibbutznik socialist, all the way to, an Israeli Arab / Palestinian, to a Bedouin, to a Druze, right? Like you get the point. And I've taken many groups of these students to Israel over the years, and there is one non-Jewish student over the course of 3 trips that I'm still in touch with. He happens to be the furthest politically to the right, and so it's sort of aligned with his politics anyway. But everybody else, there were some Muslims, but it was mostly just, white liberals. They're either have completely detached themselves from the conversation, or some of them have actually said, yes, you're right, Israel is terrible. When we went, we saw the security wall between the West Bank and Israel, and we visited a checkpoint, and it is as bad as everyone's talking about. And so in a lot of ways, I've mostly given up. It's not to say I don't want to have this conversation, but, I'm curious, Julie, your thoughts on this as well, because you have also been doing a lot of this activism. So
yeah, thank you for having me, Danielle, and it's such an honor to be working with Soraya. It's such hard work. I think that a lot of us feel that we have been rejected by so many of the people that we thought were our allies. And I worked in the immigrants' rights space for 15 years and represented clients in Spanish, and most of my colleagues were either Asian Americans or Latino Americans, and I represented women from all over North Africa and the Muslim world. And that space has become what I think is really exclusionary of Jews. And all of a sudden, Jews who made up so many civil rights attorneys and so many immigrants' rights attorneys are the oppressors and evil Zionists. And it does feel like a betrayal. But in terms of where we go, I think one is we have to keep working on trying to unify the Jewish community. So not only are we turning internal in the Jewish community, but maybe even writing off those within the Jewish community that don't agree with us. So Soraya, I wish we had like 1 million Sorayas. Like we need to Of course you have your own individuality, your own history, and your own story, but we can't bring Soraya to every single interaction we have, but certainly bringing her and her colleagues' voices into the Jewish community to help explain that the Muslim voice is not a monolith in the same way that the Jewish voices are not a monolith, and that it is okay within Islam to have a reflective look at current events, just as we often, it is very much the tradition of Judaism to critique and criticize and evaluate world events, or to try to not accept things at face value. And so to have a Muslim woman saying that too is acceptable within the Muslim tradition, I think is very important. So I think working within the Jewish community to try to get people into that place, those who perhaps we've lost. But then also I would love for this collaboration with Soraya and I to reach out to some of those allies that I feel I've lost. So maybe, my former immigrants' rights advocate colleagues and all of the people who I worked with in academia, who I feel I was so close with and that identified with me and my values, has now somehow stopped seeing me as the same person. And so perhaps Soraya's voice in working together, maybe they will be able, those Latina activists and Asian American activists and African American activists can start to rehear me as the same civil rights advocate I always was, but I seem to need a bridge. And that's a very strange place to be in, where I always thought I was the bridge builder. Now I'm finding that I need a bridge to get back to access the same communities that I worked in for most of my career.
True.
I didn't know you well enough the last time you were on the podcast, just for listeners, about a year ago. And I didn't know you well enough to ask you this question, but now I do, so I will ask you. Has this made you question the fundamental values of what you were doing in the first place? In other words, there is an argument, it's much more popular in Europe, but I suspect it will become much more popular in America, which is we actually should be very careful which immigrants we accept from which countries, and maybe there should actually be some ideologic litmus test, obviously not on skin color and ethnicity, but if somebody is not willing to say, I affirm the equality of man and woman, or I affirm, freedom of religion, or, basic tenets of Americanism, maybe we don't actually want them in the country. And so, having hundreds of thousands, if not millions of refugees pouring into countries where, as Soraya said before, anti-Semitism and anti-liberalism is on the rise, has that made you question that default assumption anymore? And next time, if you are asked to, say, represent somebody coming from Syria, will you ask a question of, okay, are you, we get that it's a mess in Syria right now, but before, I help you, come to Irvine, I just want to make sure, we're on the same page here with, like, heretics should not be killed, and homosexuality, you don't have to love it, but, they shouldn't be killed, and all of that.
It's such a complicated question. So I continue to stand firmly behind immigrants' rights. I am very upset by the raids rounding up innocent people who are working and just trying to support their families, which I think many do not fit the molds of the description that you have been saying. And I think that immigration is the key to the American dream. The idea that you can be born into this country and be the next Bill Gates, that be the next Barack Obama, is what I think promotes equality and plurality and freedom of religion. I know that the the pull yourself up by the bootstraps and that everybody in America has the same opportunity is not true. I do understand and very much believe in institutional restrictions of privilege, but I do think that the ingenuity of immigrants and the assimilation of immigrants is what makes America unique. Do I think at the same time that we should all have some shared set of values? I do. I think that falls on the public school system. That is where immigrants have always learned, quote, American values.
What you're saying, I just, maybe this is a pushback, and Soraya, I would love to hear, after I push back, you guys can both take turns here. What you're saying seems couched in oftentimes what I hear a lot of, Western liberals, including, sometimes myself, which is couched in this basic idea that at the root of it, all people kind of just want the same thing, which is, to work hard, to what's best for their family and kids. And what we've learned, and this is obviously not true of every immigrant, so I'm not saying that, but there actually are ideologies out there that don't think prospering in this life and, creating a loving, happy environment for them and their children is the most important thing. They actually, honor death and martyrdom, and, we don't have to go through the tenets of Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis now. And so that I think would challenge the assumption in some way, because clearly, at least from my perspective, and Soraya, if you disagree, also push back, countries like England and France and many Western European countries, they are not better today because of immigration. I'm afraid to walk in the streets because of immigration.
So in American immigration law, and I can't disagree with your assessment of Europe or your assessment that there are certain groups of people who have settled in countries around the world who don't wish to recognize and appreciate Western values and don't want to further these ideas of democracy or pluralism. All of that is true. But in American immigration law, to obtain asylum, to obtain permanent immigration status, you do need to, and you should be evaluated by an appropriate immigration attorney that can fully assess that. But yes, you do have to actually denounce terrorism. You do actually have to vow to uphold the Constitution. And there is background screening on any association with terrorist and extremist groups. So does anybody get through the cracks? Yes, they do. And I am particularly concerned when those questions are not being taken seriously. For example, when the Council of American Islamic Relations is given the ability to do that immigration screening, and they are the ones asking if people are associating themselves with terrorists or support terrorism, and they outwardly support terrorism, I don't think that that is a thorough and full of vetting of those immigrants. But if that vetting is done accurately and done accurately by DHS, I do think that we can, at least for the most part, weed out that ideology.
I want to go back to three issues that we discussed here. First is that outreach we need to, and you've tried, it's not worked. I believe that we need to remember we have not reached the critical mass yet. So we can't do outreach for 2 days or twice a week and say we have done it all. I believe it's on every one of us to aggressively do the outreach. It doesn't mean only Jew and Muslim, Jew and Christian. There are Christians who need to come on board. So we have to spread the Hindus who are there, the Zoroastrians. Everybody has to do this who have this vision for a better country, and if we want to get rid of anti-Semitism particularly. So look at the Montgomery bus boycott. What are the resources those people had? But they had something that we don't have today. That is solidarity and commitment. For 1 year, African Americans walk to work. I don't think we have people who are willing to do that today. We might do it for 1 day, and we might need a comfort. So we have to step out of that comfort zone, and we have to really connect the dots. Without us all doing work in silos, how can we bring the collective together? And look at David and Goliath. He just had a slingshot. He would never have succeeded. But we have to keep on imagining and being creative. That was one thing I wanted your listeners also to know. It's not a cloak, like even peacemaking. It's the means by which we arrive at the goal. It's not something we wear today and okay, this is not working. Because I know for sure, even in the Muslim world, they keep telling us that, the Jewish people are not reaching out either, So though I disagree with that complaint coming from my community, because that's not what I have experienced, I think let's keep not leave room for that. And then secondly, about immigrants, I think we have to do better screening, definitely. And I know you said that too. Take, for instance, this guy, Khalil, Muhammad Khalil, you know. He lives in he's from Syria. I just heard he's from Palestine also. Julie, you have to tell us a little bit of background about his journey. He's from Syria. He comes here and he's given maybe subsidized, maybe free lodging in New York, in Manhattan. He attends Columbia. Look at what he's giving back to us, to this country. My daughter is also in New York. I'm paying her tuition. I am paying her rent. And she's a citizen. She doesn't have those privileges. So I feel there's something deeper that is lacking in some of the immigrants whom we see on the streets, who are calling for death to America. I never thought I'll see that. So there is a lack of humanity in the way things are happening, because there are Muslim organizations like CARE who sanction that kind of behavior. So we have to revamp the whole thing. And I come from a space, I feel we might not fix anything at the end of the day, but let's fix ourselves and being in a state of gratitude to everything, even to this country. It has given us wings to fly. If you want the wings, you can get it. And I don't think if Khalil was to raise his voice in Syria, he'd be in prison, you know. And people like that who take so much for granted just to abuse this country, there needs to be a different standard for us to measure immigration moving forward.
I do want to just ask you how we as Jews could better reach out to the Muslim community. Daniel mentioned that in our conversation in anticipation of this interview, you mentioned that I had some very negative interactions with some extremists. Some of them were Muslim, by the way, and some of them weren't, in Irvine City Hall, and said horrible and threatening things to me. And why would I want to work with a Muslim woman after I had that experience? And I too, like Rabbi Daniel, was a bit shocked. Of course I want to work with you. You know, I have Muslim friends before October 7th. I have fewer now. I'd like to have more. But you are reaching out to me in solidarity. Absolutely, I'm going to extend my hand back, enthusiastically so. But I don't know as much how the Jewish community can reach out more. So you came into a space that I already felt safe in, right? You approached me in a pro-Jewish chat in a space where I didn't have my guard up. But how do I reach out to the Muslim community more effectively, where because you mentioned, well, the Muslim community says as Jews aren't reaching out. Well, I'm willing, I'm very wanting to, and I think I'm brave enough to, but where and how do I do that?
Great question. You said you knew a lot of Muslims.
Well, I did, yes, in
Do you have
school.
a list of their names and contacts? We can begin there.
Yes.
Yeah. And if they are resistant, but it depends on what they are going to tell you.
Yes.
I sometimes feel we also have an expected outcome.
Yes.
So when we don't get it, we don't go to the next level.
Yeah.
And what it has taught me is don't have that expectation.
Yeah.
Just be in a conversation. And that's hard. I'm not by any means undermining how hard it is, you know, when you, and that goes back to what you said about why are the Jews even wanting to talk to us. I tell my colleagues who are Muslims, you know, so much that wrong has happened in the Muslim world towards the Jewish people, and that they still are open in that space, wanting to engage. That is beautiful for us. Do not ever lose that. That's a lesson you teach us. So that's beautiful. Going back to what you said, Julie, perhaps let's begin with that list.
Yeah.
And then go to your Christian friends also, you know, people of other faith.
Yes.
Then you create a new track, and then you come together, and then we have done that, and it has been successful. We will collaborate on whom once you build this small network.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, and that I think is what we're doing, and what I was referring to in terms of maybe some of I thought of as my traditional allies or liberals that are not Jewish, right? So to first make inroads and build bridges within the Latino and the Asian and African American community, Christian community, Hindu community, and we are doing that, and we do have success in that regard.
But it seems like that success, I mean, I'm just going to pontificate here. If I'm off by this comment, let me know, is coming from all those people who are on the right. So we are connecting with mostly Republican, but very religious Christians. We're connecting with Hindus who have their own reasons for wanting to side with Jews on this, which, we don't have to go into. Zoroastrians sort of the same thing as Hindus, and conservative Christian Latinos. We're not connecting with the head of the Latinx Center on campus who has, pronouns in their bio and has been teaching, left-wing politics for the last 30 years, right? So it seems like that group, and this is sort of what I was saying before in terms of almost opportunity cost. I mean, I'll have a conversation with anybody about anything. I mean, even if somebody walked in and they said, I am a Hamas supporter, I would love to talk to them just to get into the psychology of it. I mean, I'll push back like I do for any view, but at a certain point, it's opportunity cost, right? It's, what other 20 things can I do during the day, except for, let's not even talk about the Islamic community in terms of trying to talk to progressives, which just seems to not work for all the reasons that I think we sort of know. So that's, I think, the only, little pushback I would give there.
So I think I have one positive example that perhaps is a wedge and that we can use into the future. There was some pushback by the UAW workers this past week. So the United Auto Workers Union has been very much taken over by the anti-Israel cause. And as many unions in many different fields have. And there was a significant pushback this week from a group of auto workers that they feel that their union has been hijacked and that they want their union to represent their concern, which is safety in their jobs and wages and health benefits, etc. So perhaps where we need, certainly the unions are a very large concern, and I am working with a lot of people who are experiencing anti-Semitism, not only in the teachers' unions, but in a physicians' union, public health or workers' unions. But, perhaps where we need to start is to identify, not based on the anti-Semitism, not based on the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, but on our commonalities and shared purpose as Americans, right? So we value your hard work. We want you to have safety in your work conditions. We believe that your children have a right to health care. And let's work together on those issues, and then in the process, hopefully be able to dispel some myths about what the Jewish American community's purpose really is.
Brilliant. I totally agree with you, because what we need to establish is, who are my people? What are our shared values? Leave anti-Semitism a little outside at this moment, and continue to seek out that community that will rally around you for a shared purpose. And then I'm sure, this is a warning to the Muslim community. When you see that there is a group that's forming, they're strong, and their one intention is to do something good, then some people are going to wake up.
So I think another example of this is just here in Santa Ana. There was a lawsuit and a lot of pushback against the ethnic studies curriculum that was proposed and in some classes already being taught in Santa Ana public schools. And I think probably a lot of people are in California, but for those who aren't, AB 101 was passed that was going to mandate ethnic studies curriculum be adopted for all California high school students. And there are a lot of teachers who are opposed to this, nothing to do with the bias in the curriculum against Israel and against Jews, but the diversion of resources. So in schools that are struggling and where teachers don't have books and pens and enough resources to teach math and reading, etc., they are frustrated with the diversion of resources, attention, money to this when they want support teaching what they signed up to do. So it's another area where Jews have been able to partner specifically with the Santa Ana teachers to prioritize what is best. And it's not, I think it's important to say that this isn't tricking or like some kind of sly intentions. I also want the kids in Santa Ana to be able to learn math and English and social studies and have teachers and pens and books, etc. So it is a genuine goal in addition to my discomfort with the bias that's in the proposed ethnic studies curriculum.
Funny enough, I'm also partially optimistic, not necessarily for any of those reasons, but it's because this sort of strange alliance between Western liberals and Islamists is going to come to a breaking point, or should come to a breaking point, specifically around issues of feminism and LGBTQ advocacy. I mean, I still, we can make all the jokes we want about Queers for Palestine, but it's already, I've already been seeing how at a lot of LGBT rallies, if there's a group of, pro-Palestinian activists, they sort of get into fights over, well, we can't have the pride flag at a pro-Palestinian rally because it's against Islamic sensibilities. And so that seems like a natural breaking point. I mean, I'm curious if the progressive world will take a stand on these issues or they'll just let themselves go fully, horseshoe theory. But I wanted to ask you this because, just in your bio, you've done a lot of work in terms of, feminism and gender equality in the Islamic world, which, not necessarily a topic having to do with Jews and anti-Semitism, but it seems like we're at the precipice of some reform in the Islamic world right now. There's, obviously there's not millions of people like you, but there are tens of thousands of people like you in the West that are speaking out, that it seems to be gaining steam. And now with the internet, your ideas can be broadcasted to many more people, and not just people like you, people, all over the Islamic world. Talk to me a little bit about that. We've put on your sociology hat for a second in the Islamic world. Are we on the precipice of some sort of reform to the point where, if in 100 years, when people are talking about, the late 2020s and the early 2030s, are they going to be like, oh yeah, they were right at the beginning of what we now know to be the great reform of the mid 2040s in the Islamic world? And, talk to us about that a little bit.
Definitely, we are at a very vantage point, and change and reform is happening. If you know, Saudi Arabia is spearheading that. And in the Muslim world, when Saudi Arabia lays a standard, we follow that because of the fact that it is so closely linked to Islam, the birth of Islam, where the Prophet lived, and Kaaba and all of that. So definitely there is a lot of movement towards reform, and a lot more needs to happen. If you are talking only in terms of highlighting feminists and feminist voices, I think that is a fact, that is happening. But if you're talking about reforming other laws and all of that, we are still very slow with that. But again, the work is so immense. It took 500 years for the Christian Reformation. I think in the Muslim world we have barely arrived because there is this pushback to call out anything, to question anything. And I feel, this is what I've been telling my Muslim community, if there's something short, if there's something wrong, we Muslims have to highlight it. But today, if you see at a lot of the social media posts, people are calling out Islam left, right, and center. This morning I was listening to a podcast. I was like, what do I do to claim my Muslim identity in America? It's getting that bad. Because what we are hearing is so negative about Islam and the wars that the Prophet fought, and that's a fact. We never taught our children that Prophet fought wars. Yeah, we gave a different, wholesome picture that he was a peacemaker. Islam is not necessarily peace.
But also that can be part of reform, right? Like the psychology of reform. Right, so, let's go, we can dig in on Jewish history a little bit. If you were to open up the Tanakh/Hebrew Bible and you were to feed that into, let's say ChatGPT, or, that's all you knew about Judaism, you would rightly assume that Judaism is a very militant religion with kings, and some of our biggest stories are about wars that happened in the land of Israel, in the Iron Age, and the book of Joshua and the book of Judges and the book of Kings, right, and Samuel, ubiquity of war, and that was certainly a part of Jewish history. And one of the geniuses of at least what we now know to be rabbinic Judaism, this is the Mishnah and Gemara / Talmud, roughly 1st to 7th century CE, so now we're talking about hundreds of years later, the rabbis essentially very carefully changed Judaism up from being a centered around a geographic piece of real estate with political power to being sort of a diasporic religious type thing where power was, the rabbis famously ask, who was a man of power or who was a person of power? And they don't say the guy that can beat up their neighbor. They say somebody who could control their desire, right? So they take power from being this external militant thing to being something internal, right? We can talk about the interesting history of that, of the rabbinic reform, which is, a major step in Jewish history. So it maybe doesn't actually make a difference what a literalist reading of the Quran says. The problem is you have to be willing to give up on literalist readings, right? And I think that might be where things get a little bit stuck.
Definitely. Because if you see how the Muslims are perceived today, it's for not those reasons that we have spoken enough, and we see a militant Islam. We see not an eclectic intellectual.
But why is there not more? Right? When I teach about medieval Jewish philosophy, and I'm mostly teaching about Jews living in the Islamic world in the medieval period, because in the Christian period, Jews were not allowed to philosophize, right? So it was only in the Islamic world where you had people like Saadia Gaon or Maimonides or Moses de Leon, all the great thinkers of medieval Judaism, almost all of them in Islamic rule. Why is the Islamic community not proudly triumphing the fact that like algebra and the history of Western / Greek philosophy and Aristotle and Plato like came directly through the Islamic world, right? Like you can draw a straight line between Greeks and what the Greeks brought to the world in terms of politics and culture and geometry and math and all these things, and the Christian world, like, there's a reason why we call it the Dark Ages, right? Again, it's a little bit of a generalization, but like the straight line goes directly from Greeks, medieval Islamic world to, modern West, right? So but it's not spoken about proudly, right? Like it's very rare that, I'll talk to a Muslim friend of mine and they'll be, oh, there was this guy Ibn Sina and this great philosopher, right? Like, so why is that part not highlighted more? Like I would think, you kind of said before, oh, Maimonides are sort of a joke in the Jewish community that like 50% of Jewish schools and Jewish hospitals and Jewish groups are called either Maimonides or Rambam. It's like, we can't get enough of the guy. He's a great thinker. Don't get me wrong. I teach a whole class about him, but like, we're so proud of the fact that like, wow, there was this luminary in the Middle Ages who was a doctor and a legal scholar and a philosopher and was able to reconcile Judaism and Greek thought. Why is there not the equivalent of like, why isn't there like Ibn Sina day school for Islamic youth in Orange County? Like, why is that not a point of pride? Because in world history, that very much is a point of pride. We might not know who Aristotle is today if it wasn't for the massive Islamic translation school in Baghdad and the Islamic world. Like, if the whole world became Christian in the 9th century, we might never have been able to read Aristotle and Plato. It might have just been, lost to history.
Great question. I don't have all the answers, but I believe we were very proud of all of that, what you just mentioned, the great times that the Arabs were very creative. But what happened to us was that Islam became not only a religion, it became a political tool. And the conversation and what we were doing was diverted into, was politicized. So we saw in the Middle East rulers come up and they were very dictatorial. There was no democracy, and something happened in the Muslim world that we gave up the exploration of intellectualism and trying to advance a gentle form of Islam, because it suited those corrupt leaders to embrace and to propagate a kind of Islam that worked for them. So I might think that's where it happened. But when you just said, why aren't we seeing these kinds of schools, Ibn Rushd schools? My friend Seran Artes, she's Turkish. She opened the Ibn Rushd Goethe, right? Goethe school, mosque, women's mosque in Berlin. Today, she has 24-hour security from the police in Germany because she opened this Muslim women's mosque. And I was one of the people who went and preached at that mosque. So I don't know anymore what is wrong in this equation. We just shut down anything intellectual. We just shut down anything that is progressive and different. So this woman, she opens a mosque, and there's a threat to her life. They shot her in the neck, and since then, this is the lament I have about my community. Now, despite October 7th, I see that the Jewish community is learning and growing and changing and progressing, and we are here stuck in, you know, this overwhelming burden of carrying anti-Semitism. How can we hate anybody who challenges us? It's really, I don't know to articulate this well, but that is what is lacking in our community. We are very content where we are, and we are very content in not educating the next generation of Muslims.
So I have one more question for you, and then happy to open the floor if there's anything we want to get to in the last couple minutes. Knowing what you know about the Islamic world, if you were somehow, you know, you woke up tomorrow morning and you were in the body of Benjamin Netanyahu, or you were, you know, giving Israel some guidance as to, you know, because Israel's very much at a crossroads, right? You have some people that are still clinging to a two-state solution, others that are saying, no, Israel should just take over everything. Some saying Israel needs to reoccupy Gaza, other people saying, no, that would be crazy, right? Like, and you have this debate, and the vast majority of Jews I know, if they're being honest with themselves, they are torn. Right? Yes, you have people that are generally think, you know, reoccupying Gaza would be a bad idea, and others saying, yeah, rah, rah. Most Jews, when you actually talk to them about this, are very torn on this issue of what do you do with the West Bank? What do you do with Gaza? Do you still think a two-state solution? Should Israel just take over everything? What do you think Israel should do?
Israel should elevate to the world a level of compassion to the Palestinians. Compassion, hard as it could be. Yesterday I met my friend who's a rabbi she just traveled from Jerusalem. We had dinner together, and she was telling people like us meaning the Americans who are living in America, they want Israel to do this and to do that. I don't want to get into that trap because I don't live there, you know, because her daughter was serving on the IDF, and she said, Soraya, do you think we like to send our children to war? It is happening. So, and she asked very openly, she said, who here in America has even opened their door to a poor man to come and sleep the night? But you're expecting Israel to feed the enemy, to do everything that nobody else would normally do. So the situation is very complex. But I was at a conference 2 years ago on Israel, and there was a question and answer time, and my thing was, Israel needs a CCO, Chief Compassion Officer. And the room went silent. But in the speaker panel was a very high level army officer. He came to me later and he said, thank you for that suggestion, because sometimes we are so right and we are so good at what we are doing, we tend to forget that. And I want the Muslim world to see that there is a lot of compassion for the Palestinians, to not Hamas, I'm not saying to appease Hamas, but there has to be a track where we see this happening, and I would like to see that.
Yeah. So we've been talking for a while. Yes, there was a huge fly that just landed on the table for a second. I guess they were interested in the podcast. What else did we not cover from either of you that you just want to discuss?
I just want to circle back to the idea you were briefly mentioning about the Queers for Palestine, or the leftists, progressives, feminists' refusal to see the reactionary nature of Islamism. And I think that the problem is that the Jews, are being asked, so many of the leftist Jews that we're losing in our own community are being asked to choose between being a progressive and being a Zionist. And so I think something that we could do, again, starting with ourselves, is to assert that Zionism is a progressive value, and that we do not need to. I am very happy to work with people on all political stripes and fully support people who are far to the right, but I am very happy to work and still have beliefs that are to the left. But I think we haven't done a good enough job internally in our own Jewish community. And so when we have people of influence within, let's say, an LGBT rights advocate organization that's also Jewish, they're not then spreading the word within their organization that these policies and these people who are protesting are advocating for interests that are not supportive of what the world we want to see, that we would be discriminated, harassed, attacked, killed. And feminism the same. And so I think, we have people in Jews, the Jewish community has people in these circles, in feminist hierarchy, in LGBT rights organizations, and they are not speaking that truth. Richie Torres is the one that always is saying, I'm a Zionist because I'm progressive. Like, we need to get the Jews, the left Jews, to be proud and to articulate that Zionism is not at odds with progressivism, and then maybe we can start to persuade the non-Jews within those progressive circles.
It would be nice. I will point out, it's been interesting. I've been reading a lot about the ADL. The funny thing about the ADL is everyone seems to hate it now,
Yes.
right? For the longest time, even growing up, the ADL was classified in my community as a left-wing Jewish organization. Same with AIPAC, by the way, also. Yep. This is also like one of the funny things that, whenever people talk about AIPAC, in the community that I grew up in, because I grew up at a time when mostly Democrats were in political office, and AIPAC just has a principle they're going to work with whoever's elected. In my community growing up, AIPAC were the left-wing Jews versus, we're not going to work with Democrats and we want, right-wing Israeli government. That was sort of the right-wing Jews. But the ADL seems to have very much leaned into a lot of what you're saying, the anti-racism, the intersectionality, and that just backfired. And so if I'm looking at this from somebody trying to figure out like what institutions I want to be a part of and which ideologies I want to prop up, from my perspective, and I totally get if you are already very active in progressive circles, like, yes, don't leave, stay and fight. I just have no interest anymore. Like, I mean, that just sounds very rash, but
No, but I think that's a distinction between if you work for an LGBT rights org and you work for the ADL, because I understand the criticism, and I would say that our Jewish institutions need to focus on the Jewish community. So I would support that argument that the anti-Semitism is so pervasive and the needs in the Jewish community are so great that we need to focus on those issues in our Jewish organizations and let the feminist orgs take on feminism, the LGBT orgs take on. But if you happen to be a Jew in working for the legal rights of LGBT, those folks are not speaking up right now for Zionists or Judaism as a whole. I'm not, of course, there are exceptions, but we have voices.
A bunch of angry feminists in the comments here. That'll be good for ratings.
All right, very good.
Soraya, any final thoughts here?
Yes, so I come from the space of community organizing. We believe that change happens when people have come together to make it happen. Numbers are very critical. So in the Muslim world, we have captive audiences who go to mosques every day. I believe much of the change can come from our mosques. So for instance, I look for a time, the Pope John Paul in 85 said, if you are an anti-Semite, you are not a Christian. So we need for the Muslims to proclaim that, to reclaim that kind of language. And Quran 17:104, the night journey it is called, God says in the Quran, and thereafter we said to the children of Israel, dwell securely in the promised land, and when the last warning will come to pass, we will gather you together in a mingled crowd. We Muslims need to know Zionism is a fulfillment of Quranic prophecy, and we have to accept that, and we have to educate the Muslims on those lines, because most Muslims don't know this because we don't read the Quran. And for me, the wish would be that we rekindle the conversations, the dialogues we have had in the past, particularly in Los Angeles. We had a good relationship going with the Jews and the Muslims. And we get a little deeper. I want to go beyond interfaith dialogue to interfaith action. In order for Muslims to take full responsibility, to change the tide and show up how that we can also be compassionate.
Well, Soraya and Julie, thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.